Welcome back, troglodytes, to the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we have a 1980 Gibson VSG. Now, this SG is essentially the equivalent of a studio level in the Les Paul world. This was a model that was introduced around 1979 after the introduction of the Paul. These were kind of the counterparts to the Pauls, and they were eventually rebranded into something called Firebrand. That's where they decided to ditch these gold Gibson logos and really just brand the Gibson logo in it with a firebranding stick. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, and I might get some hate for this. I've never really liked these VSGs because I never really understood why they sell for so much. Because this is a stripped down SG, and yet it sells for about the same price as an SG Standard. Now, about a year or two ago, SG Standards from the Norlin era were so critically undervalued. I remember you could pick those things up for a little over $1,000 all the time. And now they've all of a sudden doubled in price thanks to people like Chicago Music Exchange, who just buy every single one and then list them in their shop for crazy money until people finally accept that price. But at the same time, I'm thankful for Chicago Music Exchange doing that because 70s SGs are fantastic guitars and they are undervalued. But with the standards going up in price, I've seen these also raise in price. So when you're comparing these on the market, these are a little bit more plain versus the standards. They have your traditional looking Gibson headstock, and they're a little bit fancier looking with a glossy finish. Just by comparing photos of a VSG and an SG standard online, it might seem like it's a really easy decision which one you should buy since they're around the same price. So why would anybody ever choose this guitar? Well, there are a few minute differences between the two guitars that are actually night and day, which would actually determine which guitar would be better for you. SG standards in the 70s, they have a thinner nut width. The necks feel really tiny at the cowboy chord area, and that's great for people who are shorter or they have short fingers, but for tall guys like me, sometimes that can feel cramped. These ones have more of a traditional neck profile to them, meaning it stays about the same width up and down the neck. It gets a little bit wider up here, but most guitars do. So this guitar will feel more standard. The next thing is these guys have TTOP pickups. The SGs from this era got Tarbacks. Now personally, I'm not a huge fan of Tarbacks, and once they go bad, there's nothing you can do to fix them. But TTOPs, they're worth more on the secondhand market, and I just prefer the sound of them. They've got a little bit more bite to them, and maybe it's just because TTOP sounds way cooler than Tarback. Another feature is that these have a regular Nashville-styled bridge. Many SG standards from this era have a large one called a harmonica bridge. They look ugly, they're just about as thick as another humbucker, but they are technically a superior bridge. You can find some of these with that bridge as well. The next point is kind of a half point. Notice, no output jack on the front. Beautifully located on the side of the guitar. Now, that's a plus compared to a 70s SG, but here's where it becomes a half point. In the 80s, SG standards also had them on the side. The finish on these guitars are more of a satin feel, so some people prefer that to a glossy finish like the standards will have. So that's 3 or 4 good points that are pro this guitar. But here are some things that are kind of a downfall to this one. These guitars are made out of walnut, and that's not a traditional wood for Gibson to be using for a body and a neck. Now, is it bad? No, I actually kind of like the look of these guitars. They usually have some nice wood grain to them, But some people shun these because they're not mahogany. Now in the 80s, the deluxe model versions of these are mahogany though. So if you like the look and idea of this guitar, but you can't get past the whole walnut stuff, you can find mahogany versions. So once again, it's a multi-piece walnut body and a walnut neck, and these actually have ebony fretboards. In the 70s and 80s, SG standards will either have unbound ebony boards or bound rosewood, but those SGs have small block inlays. And if this had small block inlays, I would love this guitar even more. I don't really like dot inlays unless the fretboard has binding. Then I think they look fancy. But an unbound fretboard with dot inlays, it feels a little bit cheaper in my eyes. So my perfect SG would be somewhat of a mix of a VSG and an SG standard, but these are great guitars at a certain price point. When you start paying $1,400-$1,500 for these, you're crazy. Just get a standard at that point unless you need these specs. The only reason why I would ever suggest paying more than $1,000 for one of these is if it's one of the special colored ones like the Pelham Blue. So these guitars are just kind of an oddball. They're more expensive than the Paul simply because they're a little bit more uncommon to find. I'm not going to use the word rare because you can find one when you need one, but there's usually only one or two for sale at a time. And honestly, you're going to pay a slight premium for a VSG because it's an earlier iteration before they switched over to the Firebrand model. Now these guitars lasted till around 84. There was also a solid body 335 version. And the deluxe models started to get solid colored finishes. And a notable user for a VSG Firebrand is Zakk Wylde. His very first Gibson guitar was a Pelham Blue Firebrand SG. I did a Would You Rock or Not on somebody who was claiming they had his guitar. So unfortunately, I've never been a huge fan of these guitars. I usually suggest people to just get an SG standard. They're only a couple $100 more. But honestly, I actually prefer these spec-wise. They're just not pretty enough for me, I guess. I'm not much of an SG player, so if I do play an SG, I want it to be really pretty. Whereas on a Les Paul, yes, I love the beautiful ones, but I like the stripped down bare bones rocker versions of them as well. And I've got to say, now that I know Zakk Wylde used one of these, and I have a little bit more knowledge on like Neil Schon, how he liked to have a zebra in his bridge position like on the Super Customs, there's a little bit more attraction on these guitars for me. And the tones from this thing are very grungy and kind of metal, and yet the cleans are very snappy. These pickups have a lot of bite to them. So I actually found myself really enjoying this guitar. And most VSGs haven't really impressed me in the past. But the Paul will forever be my #1 recommended pick for somebody who needs a budget studio guitar. But if you can pick one of these up for around $1,000 or a little bit less, and all original shape, you have to have the original pickups. Don't bother buying one of these for top dollar if it doesn't. Because that's kind of why these guitars are going up in value, is because these pickups are becoming expensive. Now you're probably going to wonder, is one of these replaced? What's going on here? No, for whatever reason, this is the way they did the SGs. They had a double black bobbin and then a zebra in the bridge. So now that we know a little bit more about VSG and Firebrand guitars, let's go ahead and hear how this guitar sounds. know how she sounds, let's go ahead and review the condition. Now, all things considered, this guitar is actually in pretty good shape. If this was all original, I would probably classify it as very good condition, but since it's not and it has a few replaced parts, it's more so good condition. You've got some light scratches on the face of the headstock, but nothing too bad. Original truss rod cover reads VSG. Truss rod works just fine, has plenty of adjustment room left. You've got your original nut yet, and ebony fretboard. This fretboard was absolutely filthy when I got it. Once again, rusty frets. So much built up gunk on this fretboard, but I got it looking nice and clean once again, and it is an enjoyable player. I would suggest a professional setup. You might not like the setup I did to it, but I sure did enjoy it. But if you're looking for a guitar that has no fret buzzes anywhere, probably not the guitar for you. I would say in order to remove any of the fret buzz, you've kind of got to get the bridge up a little bit higher, and then it leaves you with kind of medium-low action. And I prefer lower action. I think it's set up nicely right now. I mean, it's not so badly buzzy that you can't play anything on it, but you heard how it sounded. The guitar has a few light impressions and scratch marks. And you can't really see it, but this lacquer has actually aged quite a bit. And you can tell if you remove this pickguard, you can see the lighter color it was. And that's caused by smoke. If you're allergic to smoke or you just hate the smell of smoke, do not buy this guitar. I deep cleaned this thing the best I could. And you can see, look at my paper towels I wiped this thing down with. Every time I would just do a little bit of scrubbing, you would have all this tar build up on it from all the smoke that it has been exposed to. Now, after my cleaning, the guitar doesn't smell as much. But if you're allergic, don't buy this one. If you don't like the smell, don't buy it. But I did clean this one, so it would be a little less stinky. Original T-top pickups in here. You've got a January 29th, 1980 in the neck and a January 8th, 1980 in the bridge. And this one is named Lillian. That's the first time I've seen the name Lillian put in the bridge pickup cavity. I've heard rumors that all the different names you can see written in pickup cavities is a special grading system on how good the guitar is. Nobody knows the actual ranking, but that's the first I've seen Lillian. So you have your original bridge and tailpiece. In order to know if a 70s or 80s bridge is original, it'll say made in Germany on it. And then towards the later 80s, early 90s, it says made in Germany. But the knobs have been replaced. It came to me with 2 speed knobs and 2 metal knobs, and I don't like mix-match knobs, so I had these bonnet-style knobs that I think look pretty good, and I put those on there. Back at the headstock, our serial number is 80320584, made in USA. So this is a very late VSG. It's like just on the cutoff before it became a Fire brand guitar, but you can see there's a little bit of discoloration here. Maybe there was a sticker on there at one point in time, or maybe that's just how it left the factory. Now these guitars would come with Grover tuners. It definitely had Grovers on it at one point in time, and it now has Schallers that are era correct. However, these are not the Gibson branded ones. The only difference between the Gibson branded ones and the Schaller branded ones are the tips are a little bit different in shape. You've got a volute on the headstock with a 3-piece neck, and it's a very rounded profile, but it's still very slender feeling. You've got some nice wood grain knot in there, and it really is a nice playing guitar. I will say the neck does get a little bit sticky when you're playing it, but I think that's just because there's so much tar buildup still on it. If you take some guitar polish, I find that usually takes that off and makes it nice. Or if you plan on keeping this guitar forever, just take the finish off of it. Then it'll be an even better player. Back of the guitar, it appears to be a 4-piece body. There's no major buckle rash or super scratches. I mean, you've got some, but this guitar was definitely well taken care of. I don't think it was not played by any means, but it was well respected and nobody wore a belt buckle while playing this one. Everything's original in here. You've got the 26 week of 79 on your volume pots, and I couldn't read the week on the tone pots, but they're also from 79. Take a look at the side. We'll take a look at the sides here. You've got a few scratches and light nicks and dings, but overall, it's in great shape. This bottom strap button I added because when I got it, there wasn't one. So you've got a normal strap button on the bottom and a Schaller one on the back. Let's go ahead and do a blacklight test. This one glows great under blacklight. You can see even the pickup rings are glowing. They don't always glow, but sometimes they do. Again, replace knobs, they're not gonna glow. If you would like a set of vintage speed knobs, I do have some of those in my parts drawer. I would sell for $50 to a set. But if you don't care about vintage plastics, yeah, just save your money. Use it as a nice player. You can see you've got some finish worn off right here. Likely from a strap. It was just rubbing against the guitar. But you can only see that under blacklight. No breaks to the heel joint or anything like that, or to the headstock. That's another thing that these VSGs have over standards. You don't find them with repaired headstocks as often as the standards. So maybe they were built a little bit better, or maybe it's just because there were more standards than these. So just some light finish wear overall, and this guitar definitely passes the blacklight test. This one still retains its original Gibson case. You'll either find these in a chainsaw case or this version. This one, it's got some wear and tear, but all the latches are present and functioning, and somebody painted something on it, and you've got some wear and tear along the edges. But if you've had like a 70s Gibson case that looks like this, and you haven't liked it, I like this one better because it feels like 3 times harder, like it would actually withstand somebody standing on it. You can also see it bevels at the top a little bit higher of an arch. But the inside, it's just about the same as the Les Paul version. It's just a little bit larger. So it's the original case. It's got a light smoky odor to it, but it's not as bad as the guitar was. And you also have a compartment to store your strap. Here's something else I like about this. Just the way this guitar sits in the case. It's got a little bit of heel support. I wish it had a little bit more, but I like the angle that this case puts the headstock at. It's way off the floor, whereas most Les Pauls, they're about touching the floor with only a single neck rest. So this is definitely a better designed case than the Les Paul version. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this VSG, feel free to contact me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Troglys, Troglys. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.